Last week we took Psalm 1 as we thought about what it meant to live a good life. And today, Psalm 46 will help us think about how we deal with worry. This is a wonderful psalm of radical trust in the face of an overwhelming threat. And it shows us a way of dealing with worry. I want us to look at three things. We're going to look at the cause of worry, and we're going to look at the cure for worry, and then we're going to look at the cost that it took for us to know that. The cure, the cause, the cure, and the cost. So here's the first thing, the cause of worry. Let me start by saying something I think very important. I want to be careful, and I don't want to be clumsy. This is a very complex area, and today, as I speak about worry or anxiety, I'm not being technical. So I'm not speaking about a specific condition requiring a specific treatment or support or care. I'm speaking in much broader brushstrokes this afternoon. I'm speaking about the more common experience that all of us face, that broad range of emotions that includes worry, anxiety, but fear and stress, because that's the context of Psalm 46. There's some kind of disaster. There's some kind of specific threat. Verse 6 talks about nations being in uproar. Verse 9 uses the images of war. This is very possibly a time where God's people were literally being attacked, but we're not told specifics. And actually, because we're not told specifics, it means the psalm has this universal tone. It goes beyond any individual situation and applies out to everything. And the language of the psalm is actually extreme. It's a song, and it's written in the key of catastrophe. Look at verse 2. Listen to the way it goes. Therefore, we won't fear, though the earth give way, the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging. I mean, this is dramatic. This is chaos. It's the breaking down of life as the psalmist knows it. In fact, it's actually the language of uncreation. See, if you're familiar at all with the Bible, particularly the very beginning, this is a reversing of the first chapters of the Bible, of Genesis. Because there in Genesis, you have God creating, and the land emerges from the water. God creates a place where you have life and order. And here the psalmist says the opposite happens. It is a picture of life undoing. The land falls back into the chaos of the water. Everything is unraveling. And of course, in a situation, in a circumstance like that, worry is obvious. And if that kind of chaos is unleashed, then in anybody it will cause a kind of anxiety. And it may be that that's the kind of experience that you feel yourself in right now. It's a worry because the bottom of your world just fell out. But I think as significant is that low-level sense of worry that many of us live with, a daily experience. So a lot of thinkers describe that we live now in an age of anxiety. It feels like the common experience that many of us live with. It's not a new thing. This psalm shows you that. It's not just a modern problem. In many ways, people have the same worries they always have: relationships and money and family, all of those universal kinds of things. But what's different is we live in an environment that feeds worry like it never has done before. We used to only have local concerns, but technology changed that. We're now surrounded by the problems of the entire world. And more than that, because of the nature of the technology, we're always connected. We're switched on the whole time. So the worries of the world are always with us in our pocket. As we scroll, as alerts come up, as news feeds come in. The point is, worry can be about catastrophic life events, like the psalm, the crises, the disasters, but it can be at an everyday, low level as well. A rumbling sense that everything is not okay in the world. Now, if that's the case, And if human beings have always faced this, and interestingly enough, if you go back to the very earliest sources of human wisdom and human writings, they address worry. They address concerns. They always have done. Then the question is why? Why do we feel this way? Why is this such a constant of human experience? Well, here is the Bible, the answer the Bible gives. It's because the world has been distorted. The world has been disrupted. It didn't start this way. You know how many stories start. You know how all the great stories start. A perfect world, but into the perfect world comes a wicked curse. So many fairy stories, so many other kinds of stories, so many Disney stories. Now, from the Bible's point of view, listen. What if that wasn't a coincidence? What if instead it was an echo of reality? An echo of the fact that God made a good world, a place where we could dwell in peace, free from worry and concern. And the ache we feel that comes out in our stories and our songs, the ache we feel is actually from a deep memory, a desire for the way things used to be. We want to return to how things were before the world got broken. We want to go back to Eden. And all of us have deep in our souls a desire to be restored to how things were at the beginning. Here's how probably one of the greatest story writers of certainly the past century put it, Tolkien. He said, we all long for Eden. And we are constantly glimpsing it. Our whole nature at its best and least corrupted, its gentlest and most humane, is still soaked with a sense of exile. Translation? We feel like we don't belong. We have a sense that things are not the way they should be in the world. Most people struggle to understand why they feel that way, but Tolkien, the Bible, they know. It's because the world is disrupted. Everything's been distorted. And that's why we're plagued with anxieties and worries. But what can we do about it? If that's the cause, what's the cure? That's the second thing. The cure, of course, that's a preacher's exaggeration, as if I'm going to cure something, just in a second point of the sermon. It's not as simple as that. But the psalmist says you need to do something. And the psalm lays out four things, actually. There is a hope. There is a way to deal with this. Let's take a look. I'll be really brief on each one. Here's the first thing you've got to do, says the psalm. You've got to be realistic. Be realistic. The whole psalm, the whole Bible actually says you've got to know trouble will come in the world. You've got to be realistic about it. If we live in a fallen world, trouble is going to be part of it. And so you need to figure out a way of dealing with that trouble. Because if you don't, then every time it comes along, it will cripple you. All the crisis that's unfolding, as hard as it is, you don't find the psalmist confused. Confused perhaps about the specifics, but not just about the existence of trouble in the world. He has a way of viewing the world that incorporates disaster. Now, if you don't, then do you know what you'll find? You'll find yourself constantly devastated. Why? Because when trouble comes, and it will, when troubles come, you've got to face not only the trouble, but the sense of shock and surprise that there even is trouble. So you deal with the event itself, but then you have to deal with the fact that, well, I don't think the world should be this way. Every time you're devastated twice over. Now, what am I saying? Become cynical? No, I'm not saying that. This isn't bitterness. It's not cynicism, but it is realism. Do you have a view of the world that can incorporate disaster? You say, I'd love to get that. How do I? Well, you do the next thing. You see who God is. That's what the psalmist says. Look at the incredible images, famous images the psalmist uses to describe God. Verse 1, God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. See, God is a refuge. A refuge is a is a shield in the face of danger. This is external. This is defensive. The psalmist says that in God we find shelter, which is why you get the same communicated in verse 7 and in verse 11 with the image of the fortress. Did you hear that? Verse 7, the God of Jacob is our fortress. Repeated. Verse 11, the God of Jacob is our fortress. God is described as being a fortress, a castle, a place of safety, a place you can get into that offers defense and protection. But he's also described as being our strength. Now that one is less about the outside and speaks more about what we're like on the inside. This one is internal. It's about the sense that we are vulnerable in the world, that we are weak, that we need the strength of another. We worry that we won't be enough for the troubles we have to face. But the promise is that we have a God who empowers us in our weakness. And both of those images are summed up in the description that God is an ever-present help in trouble. Now, the Hebrew that this psalm was written in originally conveys something a bit more than that. It's something like God is a help that can be found whenever you need it. I mean, it literally reads, He is exceedingly available. Isn't that lovely? This is a God who is exceedingly available. No matter what the trouble, no matter when it comes, God is present to be our refuge and our strength. Verse 5 puts it that He's there at the start of every day as dawn rises. But I want you to see something vital here. The psalm begins by saying God is. Before it goes on to say God does, it starts with God is. Now God does do things, we'll see that shortly, but here's the vital truth. Our security is in who God is. The promise of the psalm is not that disasters disappear from life, it's that God is enough in the midst of the disasters that occur within life. He's the refuge that we need. You get the same point made in the picture of the city in verse 4. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her, she will not fall. God will help her at the break of day. What makes the city safe there? What makes it secure? It's not the walls, it's not the bricks, it's not the infrastructure. It's that God is there. It's that God is in the midst of that city. That's the promise of the psalm. Not that a Christian is free from illness or injury or accidents, all the things that cause worry. That isn't the promise. The promise instead is that none of those things will ever have the power to ultimately sink us. Because none of those things will ever be able to separate us from the God who is refuge and strength. You've got to see who God is, and then you've got to see what God does. See what He does. The Bible is actually really subtle when it comes to dealing with worry. It offers a whole series of different approaches. This isn't the only thing it has to say by a long way. So it gives practical solutions. We could have looked at that for a whole afternoon together. Wise ways to deal with worry. It gives spiritual solutions, which will help you focus onto the right things. It gives you thinking solutions about what to do with thoughts and patterns. But what Psalm 46 gives you is a power solution. A power solution. It shows us that one way to deal with worry is to see what God does. It reminds you of who God is and what He's like in His power. You get a vision of God's power and you use that vision on your worries. Look at the invite in verse 8. Come and see what the Lord has done, the desolations He has brought upon the earth. The invite is to look at what God does. And when you look and when you see what God does, what is it exactly you see? Here is a vision of unsurpassed power. Unsurpassed power. Verse 6, nations fall before the power of His voice. All the affairs of humans. This is the world of politics and governments and nations and history. God is over all of that. Verse 9, He has the power to end warfare. The war machine is nothing before the power of God. All the unstoppable human forces we can't control, he can. And then you have the fact that he's in perfect control over all of creation. Verse 6, it says he lifts his voice and the earth melts. The earth, the symbol of permanence and stability, or the waters, as we looked at already, the symbol of chaos and destruction. God has effortless power over all of creation. Now you say, okay, how do I use that on my worry? What does that have to do with my worry? It brings perspective. It brings perspective. In fact, it can blow you away with perspective. Jeff Goldblum, who I love because he's in the greatest film ever made, which is Jurassic Park. These glasses are a little nod to Jeff. He did this great documentary series on offbeat subjects, and he does one on fireworks. And he asked the question, why do we love to look up and watch explosive lights in the sky? And here is his conclusion, and as far as I'm aware, he isn't a Christian, but his conclusion is this: because human beings crave awe. We want wonder. We want to look up and feel small. And in the best of a firework display, you get a tiny opportunity to put your life and problem in perspective. Now here's the thing, fireworks will only get you so far. But what about a vision of the God of the universe? Well, a vision of a God like that will do for perspective like nothing else can. You have to get perspective in the midst of your worry. Nothing will do that more than seeing the greatness and glory of God. And when you combine that power with his intimacy, you have an utterly unique way to deal with worry. The danger doesn't go away, but your view of it can be transformed. You know the Lion King? You know Simba in the Lion King? He has this great thing, he's strutting as a little lion cub, he's showing off. And he says this, he says, danger. Ha! I walk on the wild side. I laugh in the face of danger. That isn't the Christian view. And it's not the view of this psalm. Can I do what I don't think anyone has ever done in history before, which is contrast Simba with John Calvin? Because John Calvin says this, here's what a Christian does. Sons and daughters of God do not find danger laughable, nor do they jest at death, but in danger they rejoice, because they know God's promised aid outweighs all the evils which inspire terror. Be realistic. See who God is. See what God does. Here's the last thing you've got to do. You've got to humble yourself. So much worry stems from pride. Now, that sounds tremendously harsh and can be easily misunderstood. I just want to scooch through this one because I need to move to the last thing. But one of the things that makes worry so troubling is it reveals a deep truth, which is that there are things in life that we simply cannot manage, manipulate, or control. And yet so much of our worry stems from the fact that we think we should be able to manage, manipulate, and control all things around us. The fuel behind so much of our worry is the internal demand to know that everything will turn out fine. Our worry is fueled by a desire for control. But listen to what the psalm tells us. Verse 10, we need to remember that God says, be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. There's lots of phrases that the Bible uses when it speaks about being quiet or calm. And we often think of this one as one that is about comfort first and foremost. It's a word to harass people. It's actually not. There are phrases that can convey exactly that. Do you know what this is more like? This is more like a rebuke. It's more like a parent breaking up two fighting kids, saying, come on, leave it off now. Leave it to one side. This is a challenge from God to leave our frantic activity, to silence our incessant chatter, to humble ourselves enough to stop and listen and remember that we are not in control, but He is. It's the cause, the cure. Let me finish with this. What does it cost for us to know this degree of peace? For us, with verse 2, to not fear in the face of danger. There's a great Old Testament writer who said that what you get in this psalm is an echo of Christmas. Because did you hear the repeated promise? It's the first part of verse 7 and the first part of verse 11. The Lord Almighty is with us. The promise is that God is with us, that God dwells in the midst of us. And that, of course, is what we celebrate as we remember that through Jesus, we have Emmanuel, God with us. The Son of God, in all His power, resource, and sufficiency, coming to dwell with us. And that image of the city in verses 4 and 5 is significant. It's a literal reference to Jerusalem. And the holy place where God dwells in the temple is within Jerusalem. Jerusalem and the temple both stand as signs of the presence of God in the midst of His people. Now you fast forward to the Gospel of John, and right at the beginning of John's Gospel, you find Jesus in Jerusalem. You find Jesus entering the temple in Jerusalem. You find Jesus making a whip, driving out the sellers and the money changers, and saying in John chapter 2, verse 16, get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market. And the people are astonished. They say, what right do you have to come into Jerusalem, to come into the temple, and to tell us to do these things? And here is how Jesus answers. Destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days. What does He mean? The temple, the place where people could come to experience God's presence, to worship Him, to meet Him, to know Him, to make sacrifice for sin. Here is what Jesus is saying. That place is now me. Jesus says, this is my Father's house because no one is closer to the Father and no one comes to the Father except through me. So now it's through me, in my body, He says, that will become the perfect place where you meet, worship, experience God. My body will be destroyed as the final sacrifice for sin. It will be through my death and through my resurrection 3 days later, you will know the reality of God. I am the one who will allow you to know the presence and the peace and the comfort of God. Do you see this? Do you know this? It's through Jesus that God comes to dwell with us. Jesus is the place where sinful people like us can meet with a holy God. And do you remember what we said? Where the safety comes from in the psalm? The safety comes from God being in the midst. And now in Jesus, we can know to an infinitely greater degree as He pours out His Spirit, His presence with us in all things. You know what that results in? A deep sense of grounding, of stability. Remember verse 2, mountains fall. Verse 6, great nations and empires and kingdoms fall. But look at the person who has the presence of God. Verse 5 says they will not fall. Guess what? It's the same word used in all of those verses. Creation falls. Empires, kingdoms fall. Everything shifts, moves, falls. Nothing can be relied upon except for God. And when you know you're under His protection in Jesus, then you will not fall either. Use this great comfort on your worries. Let me be honest with you, the worst of them might be realized. The world can unravel. But even if it feels as though creation itself is dissolving into formlessness, God is still a refuge and strength. In Jesus, he's with you. You can stand without fear. You can know a life-giving river, even in the eye of the storm. Let me pray. Father, thank you so much for being a refuge and strength for us, for being ever present for us in Jesus. Help us in our battles with worry. Give us eyes to see what you're like, the faith to behold your works. Spirit of God, reveal your greatness and glory in such a way that silences our pride, stills our troubled spirits, and brings us peace in an age of anxiety. Amen.